I'm Su Pinnell, and this is one of our many seminars that were related to our book, Guiding K-3 Writers to Independence, The New Essentials. Pat Scharer and I edited this book, and it's written by a group of wonderful authors who all are talking about different ways to help children expand their ability as writers. It is for a K-3, but we hope there might be teachers of even older children who will find this book helpful in your work. This chapter is called Writing About Reading, written by me and Irene Fountas. And we wrote the chapter because we think writing about reading is one of the most important kinds of writing. It doesn't take the place of Writer's Workshop and the personal narratives and the many different genres that children develop using the writing process over time. But writing about reading has a special purpose. Writing about reading is sometimes called writing in response to reading. And it can be many different kinds of writing, from just a short summary of what you read, to a quick one-paragraph response to what you read, to diagramming part of the text so that you understand a timeline or you understand the structure of a text. Writing about reading has many benefits to the learner. For one thing, writing about reading sharpens thinking. It helps the reader/writer to extend thinking about a text, to become more reflective. Many of you, I'm sure, if you have been a member of a book club and you're reading a book like Adams, to bring to this book club and discuss with your friends, you might have little sticky notes. You might have a little notebook that you've jotted down some notes. They could be brief notes. You might have noted some page numbers that you think are particularly important and you want to bring to the attention of your colleagues in that book club. So we use writing to support the memory and also to remember our own thinking. For young children, the writing about reading rests on the idea of conversation and what they've talked about as they read the book. Well, let's just look at 2 or 3 examples that give you a feel for the wide range of writing about reading. This first example is interactive writing, and it's a group of kindergarten children, and they have been hearing stories about the gingerbread man. And they've begun to internalize this classic story, some of the repetitive language, certainly the sequence of events, and you can see in this beautiful chart they've made, which is on a wall in their classroom, how they have been able to use temporal sequence to place the events in the order in which they happened and to remember the characters. So this is providing a kind of cognitive map of this story. It could be any story, not necessarily that they would remember the gingerbread man, but it's giving them an example of the way stories are structured, the way they're put together. And this kind of acts like a roadmap for comprehension. They will start to expect that stories have a beginning, a sequence of events, an exciting part, and an ending. They start to expect that, and that really scaffolds their comprehension. And of course, it also scaffolds their ability to write a story, whether it's a memoir from their own lives or a fiction story. Look at the next one. This is using as a basis the reading of one or perhaps several informational texts. And the child starts out by saying, "A turtle comes out of an egg. Did you know a turtle comes from an egg?" Now think about the style. This writer has noticed how the writers of informational texts start their stories and make them interesting. That idea of questioning your reader, talking directly to your reader, is reflecting some knowledge of written language. And so the writer goes on, and another thing I like about this series is when young children are writing informational pieces or stories, it is really helpful for them to put them on several sheets of paper so their illustrations match the text. And in informational writing, children can realize that often there's an illustration, and that illustration actually provides information about the topic or the content. And you can see that in this piece from a young writer. There's an interesting one on the next page, and this is actually from an older writer, a group of writers actually, and the teacher has used shared writing, and they've done something very simple. They've recorded what they've noticed about how the writer is showing the passage of time in the book Charlotte's Web. And don't you think, after, as a group, noticing this, they didn't do while they were reading, they reflected back and revisited the text and looked for these examples later. But once this has happened, these students are much more aware of the way writers show passage of time. So that's a much more sophisticated example, and it's an example of kind of functional writing that is doing an analysis of a text. And look at the next one by an individual writer, written in response to a very simple book about a little bunny who keeps saying, I can hop in the grass, I can hop on the stairs, I can hop on my bed, things like that. Very simple to read, but the writer has captured two different interesting facts from that story and has written and illustrated them here. And has obviously had, probably this is written with a teacher right beside the student so that the student could produce some of the words and the teacher can fill in the parts or the spelling of words that the student doesn't know. But I would also like to point out that this is a very beginning writer, and so this text, written with the help of a teacher, so it's standard spelling, reflects something from the book she's read, and it's another text in another context that this young child can take home and revisit and reread. And by the way, this writer probably also learned a couple of high-frequency words, maybe more. I, can, maybe the. And those will be very useful to the reader in monitoring reading those first texts, and also in writing. So, writing about reading starts with conversation. We talked about intentional conversation in connection with interactive read aloud. In fact, intentional conversation is just used all the time throughout many of these different contexts. But it must start with talk. So we're not talking in writing about reading of just handing young children a piece of paper and giving them a writing assignment. We're talking about using conversation to help them form their ideas, get their ideas out. So extensive use of oral language is a critical feature in supporting the writing process, and this is according to Lucy Calkins. It's also very important in using writing to write about your reading. We have to remember that all forms of writing work best within a broader context in which there's always meaningful talk going on, both direct engagements and engagements in texts. And we've said that in many different contexts. So, writing about reading, children talk about texts, and this naturally leads to writing. They learn to select the important information from a text. And so when the young child was thinking about Bunny and what he thought was really important, that was a selection of two events from the text that he thought were really important. They start to intentionally remember information. Writing about reading helps to crystallize or summarize the thinking about a text, either to an important or exciting part or a summary of the entire text, a kind of retelling as we saw in The Gingerbread Man. They learn how writers organize texts, and they can experience memorable characters and events. And so the writing then helps them revisit those characters and say more about them and remember them better. It is a powerful way to connect reading and writing.